Hi, welcome to Money Control's Beyond Averages, our weekly data podcast where we talk about the story behind the big numbers. Today, in our discussion, we have with us the GST rate rationalization that happened last week with the GST Council, bringing down the rate structure to two practical rates, the 5 and 18%, and removing the 12 and the 28% bracket. Besides the big rationalization, the GST Council also made recommendations to make compliance more easier by allowing faster registration for smaller enterprises and making the refund process easier. How far does this go in making ease of doing business, and how better can we do in this scenario? We have with us Hardik Gandhi, partner Deloitte, and Prashant Agarwal, partner PwC, to discuss the issue. Hardik, Prashant, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. Hardik,
Thank you.
let me go to you first. And what are these reforms that have taken place, if you can explain for our audiences, and how do they help?
Sure, Ishan. I think we have all heard about the rate rationalization, but there has also been some quiet reforms around ease of compliances. Uh, on 15th of August, when the Prime Minister made announcements regarding the next generation reforms, there were three pillars which were announced, and pillar one and pillar three spoke about simplification of compliances, ensuring that there will be pre-filled returns, and moving on to the next generation of reforms so far as compliance is concerned. I think with that, there are two announcements which are there, which are being announced in this 56 GST Council meeting. One is the simplification around GST registrations. For the small, non-risky businesses where the turnover is less than 2.5 lakh per month and are doing B2B supplies, they can get registration within a period of 3 days. And it's an opt-in, opt-out facility which they will have to get the registration much faster. The another important point regarding registration, which always has been for the e-commerce players, where the small sellers usually, if you're operating in, you have a business in one state, but then you have your stocking points in multiple states. The challenge has been that you have to have a physical infrastructure in those states where you have a stocking point, but you really don't have your own infrastructure or presence. Now, GST Council in this meeting has given an in-principle approval that they will have some mechanism to support the small sellers, which is MSMEs, who have a place in one state, infrastructure in one state, but a stocking points in another state. Maybe they may not be required to have a physical infrastructure in that state where they have stocking points, and they can take the registration based on their home place of business, which is one of the great positive thing which has happened, because that is the ease of business we are talking about when you are actually supporting MSMEs doing sales through e-commerce platform. Another important aspect, which has been rolled out, is the fast tracking of the refunds for both for exports and for inverted duty. 90% of the refunds will be given upfront right from November 2025. This ensures that the cash is in the hand as soon as possible. Of course, if there are any specific cases, it will have detailed scrutiny, but largely what we see is that the ease of doing business and ensuring that the cash is in the hand as soon as possible within 7 days, it's a great move. So overall, from a compliance simplification on the registrations and on refunds, really good move to support businesses, and but more particularly for the ease of doing business.
Prashant, coming to you, would you call this a big bang in terms of compliance as well? Because we've been talking about how this is a big bang in terms of the rate rationalization aspect, bringing the rates down. Is it a compliance big bang as well?
Thanks, Ishan, for having me here. And good morning, everyone. Yeah, I do agree. I mean, obviously, it's a big change in terms of the rates which have come about, and that's taken the whole limelight. But I think my friend Hardik had made a point around how it is helping the small business players, especially on the registration piece. So in that way, yes, it is. It is specifically where the sellers are selling through e-commerce platforms. They have a huge play in terms of growing their own business nationally, but it has been stopped largely because of the GST compliances and the challenge which they were facing in terms of obtaining registrations. Now, with this ease, which has been in principle approved upon, we do feel that they have now got a bigger play in the whole life cycle at the e-commerce platform, and that could naturally help the MSME sector significantly. So in that way, yes, it is. Also, the government has tried to address the refunds part of it, which means 90% provisional refunds does help you, especially on the inverted duty structure, where we do believe things will continue to be, even though government has tried to improve upon it, there will be areas, sectors where you would continue to face the IDS related issues. What would need to be seen is on ground implementation of these mechanisms to ensure that the benefits actually pass on to the larger taxpayer group. That would be extremely important for them to be really considered the big bang reform per se. And of course, there is a lot more that can be done from a operational standpoint, from a compliance stand. But yes, refunds, registrations going simpler really helps the industry big way.
I think coming back to you, you were mentioning three pillars and you mentioned three reforms within those pillars. Right. One was the rates part, of course, but then the other two pillars covered three reforms. Let me go to the first one first. In aspect of making registrations easier, right? How important is this from a standpoint of new enterprises and from MSME as well, who had to register in different places because they were registered with an e-commerce player? Two, how much would this reduce this time of getting the GST number on your part? Because earlier it used to take a lot of time to get your GSTN number, and then there would be a whole process attached to it. So how
Right.
easy it is, and what needs to be the next step in this direction? Does the government need to scale it up nicely so that larger MSMEs can also become a part of it, and then larger firms can also become a part of it?
Right. So GST registrations, while it's a one would say it's not a critical compliance, but it is really a important piece because the whole starting point of a business is getting the GST registration, right? While we all focus on filing of returns and etc., but GST registration, the time uh, taken to get the registration is extremely important for businesses to kickstart. Now, what has happened on ground, and as Prashant rightly mentioned, that look, on ground implementation is more important than what's there on the paper. As far as GST registration is concerned, what we saw is that there were certain practices which were not uniformly followed in terms of, let's say, the documents which are required, the process. All of these were, every jurisdiction, every tax authority had a different way of looking at things, different way of asking documents. Now, this issue was raised, and in April 2025, a detailed circular in terms of SOP and guidelines were issued as to how the registration should be simplified and benefit the taxpayers. Of course, one could also say that there are difficult cases where you don't want them as a part of the GST system, and therefore you need to have those checks and balances. But having said that, what we would now want and probably expect is a little bit more better approach in terms of at the ground through a again revised detailed SOP and guidelines, which will help the small businesses and MSMEs to get the GST registrations much more faster. Second is, I think every MSME may not have a physical space. They may operate out of the co-working premises. So even for co-working premises, there has been a detailed guidelines and SOP, but somehow there have been some, different ways of looking, giving registrations at co-working offices. The requirements of, give either an NOC would work or an agreement would be required, so on and so forth. So those documentation challenges have been a bit of impediment in getting registrations at a co-working location. So again, some guidelines over there would be good to have. And lastly, for MSMEs, for the e-commerce, as I said, look, you may have stocking points across India, but you may have, for example, I'll give you an for a bat seller which is there in based in Jalandhar, and who needs to keep that inventory of that bats at various locations across India to ensure their delivery within 24 hours or 48 hours. Now, you can't expect that a small bat seller will have physical pace of business in all the states. He would want to operate out of Jalandhar, but keep those stock with any logistics company. But while you can have the registration in all of those states, but expecting to have a physical infra people, that is not really feasible and viable for a small MSME. This proposed change that you can have a home address, take the registrations in every state. I think that's a great move for to supporting MSMEs and the example which I gave.
Prashant, coming to you on this aspect, there is one aspect of it where we usually discuss is the inverted duty structure, which has been a pain over the last few years. Everybody's talked about how the inputs are charged higher and the outputs are much lower. Now, the new reform with two rate structures, three rather, has tried to address this to a certain extent. But can it be fully addressed until unless you have a single rate structure?
No,
To
so you're right.
how much does this solve?
No, so
Please,
you're
please go
right.
ahead.
No, no, I think you're right. It's difficult to solve everything. Yeah, so you have to have mechanisms to ease the pain as much as possible. So whether we like it or not, when you have two or three rate structures, you will have this situation of inverted duty structure because let's imagine you have solar, which is let's say or a renewable energy at 5%. The solar projects are liable, but some of their inputs could be at 18%. So definitely you will have an inverted duty structure kind of a scenario because the margins are not so high that you are able to absorb all the 18% duty rates at the input side to be able to claim it against your output liability. So you will have inverted duty structure, and therefore I think the government has gone ahead and accepted that we will try and solve as much as possible from an inverted duty structure standpoint, but at least provide the refunds 90% so that the working capital requirement, which gets blocked because of this credit accumulation, is taken care of. What we would love to see beyond this is that the inverted duty currently is only applicable with respect to inputs and not input services. Whereas if you see, most of my services are at 18% now, which means that a lot of contribution to inverted duty could be via services as well. And hence, it would be great from a government standpoint if they can also revisit this aspect of inverted duty refunds being allowed even with respect to input services. That could really provide a real benefit to the industry as well, since they've already gone that path. And with 18% being the rates now applicable even on GTA, etc., it would be good that if they can revisit that aspect as well.
Hardik, coming back to you on the inverted duty structure aspect, what can the government correct going forward? Prashant has given some guideline as to services being included, right?
Right.
And other aspects as well, that where you can't do it fully, and the 90% thing, of course, helps. But what more can be done in this area?
So two aspects. I think my friend Prashant rightly pointed out that inventory duty on as far as services and capital goods, which is the capex, which is typically incurred by business for either for setting up or for expansion, is presently not allowed. Okay, and this is even after the Supreme Court in BKC footsteps said that look, the formula there's an error, and then it got corrected. But insofar as the real implementation of the formula is concerned, for input for inverted duty refund on services is still a little, I would say, not there. So my take is that yes, there needs to be a change in the formula, and this is what we would love to have. Is that the government should allow inverted duty refund on input services at least. As far as capital goods is concerned, we do understand that you cannot have possibly an entire outflow of the refund in probably year one. So as a pragmatic solution, probably government can look at maybe 2 years or maybe 5 years window to give the refund in a staggered manner. So that's one. Another important point which is coming out of this GST rate rationalization is that the trader community, which is buying the product at which have the inventory at 18%, which they have bought it today, and they're going to sell it at a lower rate, which is let's say 5%, or they could have bought at 12 and are selling at 5. They have a little issue whereby the credit, the difference between their input, which is 18 or 12%, minus 5%, which is around 13% to 7%, is become an excess credit in the hands of the distributors or the stockist. And one other point which got which is being answered in an FAQ, which is released by the board, it says that traders cannot actually claim refund of inverted duty. Now, I think somewhere as an interim measure to ease out the working capital pressure for the distributors or the stockists, maybe some sort of a mechanism whereby inventory duty refund is allowed in such scenario. Even in the past, there has been a circular disallowing it, and then it was overruled by some of the high courts. But again, we don't want to go down to the route of dispute and litigation around this. So some sort of mechanism to ease that pressure of transition would really help.
Prashant, coming to you on there's a de minimis provision also for the low value exports. If you look at it, they've said that low value export consignments will have a faster refund process, or there's a refund threshold that has been removed. Can you explain that for a few exporters, because those are the ones that have been really aggrieved in this time because of the global uncertainty? What is it and how does it help?
So basically, it would something wherein you can claim the refunds, and those refunds could be more automated. And the idea is to ensure that they don't get stuck, basically from a claim standpoint. And there, the government is trying to support them as much as possible. The idea remains the same, that the working capital requirement for these exporters is extremely high, and if they get stuck, it would be very difficult for managing their businesses there. So that's why I think this provision has come about, and it would be really helpful. The most important would be how do that get implemented at the ground level. If that is something which can be taken care of without much problem statement for exporters in terms of documentation, etc., then it would be really of help to this community per se.
Prashant, one more question to you before I go back to Hardik. You look at the technology part of things as well, right? From a technology perspective, a few reforms were made in GST last year, right? In terms of registration, how easy it is being done and everything. Uh, what do you think is still lagging from a technology perspective as far as GST is concerned, in terms of filing, in terms of registration, in terms of other things as well?
So, great point, Ishan. I mean, thanks for bringing it up. So, I think there are two parts to it. One, I feel the government has done a lot from a technology enablement at its end, and therefore there is a lot of data which is available to them today to evaluate, and also it has pushed the industry to adopt technology. So, one is industry has to do more, I would say, in terms of managing their part of the business from a technology standpoint, starting from data management to the end of doing returns and assessment. From a government standpoint, I think GSTN has done a lot from its end, as I said, but at the same time, there are still areas like filing of registration applications. How can that be integrated with the systems of the taxpayers? They've come out with the notice APIs now. Can they do more from a refund standpoint? How can those be automated and made sure that if I have prepared an application in my laptop, it can automatically be pushed into the GSTN portal? How can I ensure that now that the GSTAT would be there, automation on that aspect in terms of filing of the appeals, etc., can be undertaken? Can government enable use of Gen AI at its end, whereby, let's say, product classification, can they bring out something which can be used by each and every one of us to ensure that the classification is correct using some of those tools itself? And I think the most important thing I feel is GST provides government a real opportunity wherein they have a lot of data from various industries, and that can be democratized and used by industry at large. So how can that be made beneficial for the economy as a whole? So imagine a situation where I am a seller sitting in Meerut, and I would know where my product could be sold best, and accordingly I could ensure that with all these registration facility being provided, the access to those goods are provided in those part of my country itself. So that is something that is a big powerful statement that government can bring in. And from a compliance standpoint, how can we make one return instead of having 24 odd returns to be filed and let it be disseminated to each of the state directly? Can I make one registration amendment and all the registration amendments are taken care of? So those are things which I would feel from a technology enablement can be undertaken for sure.
What you're talking about is mostly a GST stack, if I'm not mistaken, right? Where you have one stack which is used across, which can feed into other databases also, and there's recognition of what products go in, what don't, and it recognizes itself, so helping with Gen AI. Hardik, coming back to you, what are the reforms on the compliance side that you would like to see? Right. Prashant has talked about technology aspect of it. From a compliance perspective, what more would you like to see the government do going forward? And on
Right.
the second aspect of it, as far as the ease of doing business is concerned, a lot of problems become because a lot of our standpoints or data points don't interact with each other much. So, what can be done on that aspect as well?
So I think over a period of time, I think through technology and automation, government has done a lot of things in last 8 years. And as Prashant rightly said, that now it's probably next sort of thing or reforms what we need in further simplifying the compliances. Uh, let's say, for example, we started with e-invoicing. With e-invoicing, we already have GSTR1 return which we file. Uh, that data actually goes into GST at 3B. So do we need those multiple level of compliances of 1 and 3B to be filed every month for every state? Uh, Government in the pillar 3 did mention about the fact that they will introduce pre-filled returns. Now, if that's the case, I mean, that makes life much more easier, because you don't need to file multiple documents, multiple returns. Right from your system, data flows through e-invoicing, and through e-invoicing, the data flows into the returns. At the month, at the prescribed date, somebody has to just go and validate, approve, and log the returns and pay the taxes. Similarly, on the input side, I think government has done this, introduced this invoice management system to reconcile the credits. That is also getting stabilized over a period of time. And my sense is that once that's stabilized, the both sides of the returns, which is the output and the inward, will get far more streamlined. And and the more important part is today, gradually, I think it is not just the large organizations, but even MSMEs, they want technology and automation. They don't want manual work, because the data is pretty heavy for GST. Timelines are pretty tight, and therefore more and more of technology and automation will be used for doing the compliances. One of the important step towards simplifying compliance is also credit notes. We have seen a fair share of disputes and litigations around credit notes, linking the credit notes with the original supplies for post-sale discounts, creating a lot of issues for FMCG and pharma companies. Now, with the fact that you don't need to link the credit notes with your original tax invoice, makes the compliance and issuance of credit note far more easier to handle. And lastly is on the refunds. Of course, it is always good to have APIs for refunds, whereby your systems can actually talk to the GSTN systems and ensure that the refunds get credited directly to the bank account within 7 working days, which has been recommended by the council. So I think the next gen reforms are there on the cards. It will be more driven by automation and technology. Uh, Even if you talk about disputes today, disputes are generally all analytical based. The notices do come automatically from the system. Of course, there are certain gaps in terms of whether these are right or wrong. Maybe it's we are trying to mature over it, but gone are the days where you actually have to go and attend a tax authority, uh, give those replies. Everything is online, far more streamlined. At any part of the India, the replies can be sent over an email or through GST system, and you can be done and get those clarification done. Lastly, on the tribunal, with the fact that the GST tribunal is going to be up and running, there are a lot of backlog of the cases which needs to be uploaded on the portal. I think some sort of easier mechanism, more easier mechanism to upload that data, or the files on the portal, is something which we would expect.
Prashant, on the legal aspect of it, Hardik actually partly answered my next question, right? So go to you on that part. On the legal aspect of it, GSTAT is going to come into this thing. How many are we satisfied with the amount of principal benches that we have dealing with GST, or do we need more in this regard, given that we are going to see a lot many cases coming up regarding the filing processes and others? Two, how can we ease this process further? Can there be a mechanism where a lot of these cases, because the government does come out every few years and say, okay, fine, we'll give you a break on these many cases on value, lower values thresholds and all. Can something be done on those regards as of now?
So I think to start with, I think the number of benches is good enough because see, at the end of the day, you have to start the process. In that way, I feel that this should be a good starting point. We need to have them up and running as soon as possible. It's been on as a process for quite some time, and therefore the push from the government to ensure that from the September onwards the benches will be live, and you need to ensure that you file all your appeals by 30th of June is a very welcome step. That clearly shows the intent that we want to push this process forward. There are, more than 1 lakh cases which are pending at this point of time. So that's a big amount of backlog that we have to clear. They definitely need to have a roadmap as to how they can ensure faster clearances of these, cases per se or the appeals at their end. You're right. I mean, from time to time, government may have to evaluate: is there a way to look at how amnesty can be brought about? In fact, they've also looked at and made that statement while they were evaluating it as part of GST Council as to how we can look at multiple issues which are getting risen at the show cause notice level and ensure those are either sorted or clarified. So one of the things that they did was, let's say, whatever is the classification in auto, everything is at 18. So it really takes care of all the classification related issues, which otherwise would have arisen depending on the rate, etc. So I feel going forward, the intent has to be to relook at what all are the different types of issues that are arising, how much can be clarified. One of the things could be how to simplify the credits, because that's one area which will continue to plague the industry as to whether some of these things are creditable or not. How can we ensure that most of the business expenses that we incur should be a pass through, which is what the original principles of GST would help us know that. So that's something that we should work on. And as you rightly said, perhaps uh, any form of amnesty from time to time, at least initially, to ensure that some of the cases are taken care of would really help, because these were initial years of GST, and that requires some kind of a support, which, if provided, could really help the industry and also solve your backlog of matters which you're talking about.
Are they coming to you on this aspect? One is what can be done to ease this process as we start this whole benches and we start the process of filing of GST cases and all. The second aspect is the anti-profiteering provisions that everyone is talking about, and this is a very sticky wicket. We had that body up until a point of time. There were a few cases there. Does it make sense to bring that body in, or as the government had said earlier, market mechanisms work best in certain scenarios?
Yeah, I think after the GST Council meeting, if you saw the press conference, one of the important data point which was brought out by the Revenue Secretary, he said that in the initial years when the anti-profiteering was there, when GST was introduced, there were about 400 or 500 cases, and the revenue impact was close to about 4,000 crores. So look at the level of the collections we have and the amount of the dispute that went into anti-profiteering. So it's not even measurable or even comparable, right? So I think uh, it for this rate change, and given the amount of the time which the industry have to implement the rate changes, uh, it government has, I think, decided best in its wisdom not to overregulate, okay, and create any regulations around anti-profiteering. That's the much better way to do it. Let the industry and the trade decide as to how they want to pass on the credit. I think the limited guidance is that ensure that the full input tax credit on account of GST rate reduction is passed on to the customers by way of commensurate reduction in prices. So I think that's a very welcome move. It over regulations has never worked, and we have seen that impact in the past. Of course, in with 3-4 days now of that press conference and the GST Council meeting, we do see a lot of traction around the fact that look, companies have been releasing making press releases, press statements that they are committed to pass on the benefit of of GST rate reduction to the consumers. So I think nobody wants to be in the bad press. Nobody wants to. Everyone wants to ensure that as far as possible they want to pass on the benefit to the customers. So I think market will decide. Industries are much more mature. Companies are much more mature to understand this aspect. And while anti-profiteering provisions have a sunset of 1st of April, whereby no new investigations can be initiated, but provisions in essence are still there. And we don't want a situation, and maybe perhaps industry doesn't want a situation that look, if something goes wrong and then there are regulations introduced to again, uh, you know, uh, uh, over-regulate, as I said, for anti-profiteering. So everyone is cautious and ensuring that the GST rate benefits are passed on to the customers.
Prashant, over to you on the anti-profiteering aspect. I'm sure it's very difficult to differ with Hardik on this aspect, but it's good to have another view on it as well. What do you think about this whole aspect of anti-profiteering from a perspective? Because we are moving to a more less governance aspect. So, do we need such provisions going forward? And do we need such norms also going forward to talk about anti-profiteering and other aspects?
Yeah. So I think Hardik has made quite a few relevant points. I'll just try and add to what he said. Two, three things are very important. Does the government want to bring in anti-profiteering? They have made their intention very clear that they are looking at industries as matured stakeholders in the whole economy, and they feel that the industry would continue to pass on those benefits. The market will drive it. At the same time, it's very important for the government also to pass on the message, which is that the benefits have to be passed on, because that's the whole intent. The whole reason of releasing this much of rates reduction and bringing it to the economy is to bring money to the end consumer and look at how the consumption can be buoyant. So, in that way, I think the message has been passed on by the government. I definitely feel the market forces will ensure that the companies do pass on the benefit, and we have started seeing the results of it. Are there provisions to that effect? I think there are very limited provisions today. Hardik has made that point very clear that there is no provision to actually enforce anti-profiteering today. But yes, if the government sees things are not going the right way, one you know one just has to bring those provisions back to light. So hopefully the industry, and in our experience and discussion with the industry, I think the industry is also very serious about this. We all want buoyancy in the economy in terms of rising of the volumes, etc. And therefore, they are looking at how best they can pass on the benefits. At the same time, look at what are the increase in cost, if any, so that they can ensure that from a business standpoint, they are able to take the right decisions. And across industries, we have seen big announcements being made, be it auto, FMCG, etc., wherein the industries have clearly brought out and said that they are passing on the benefits. So hopefully, this is a good Diwali season for all of us.
So, as our experts have said, market mechanisms will decide most of whether the benefits get passed on or not. Hardik was talking about more reforms from a guidelines for MSME registration via co-working spaces perspective that needs to be done. Prashant talked about the inverted duty, which was applicable to services being brought in, and a roadmap of ensuring faster clearance of cases as we go through, and some amnesty schemes from time to time, which both Hardik and Prashant did talk about. Thank you for coming on the show. It was great to have you both, and we would love to have you back again once this process is in place. As there's an English proverb that goes, well begun is half done. I hope that's the case for GST 2.0 so that we can keep making those tweaks and over time probably have a GST 3.0 much faster rather than waiting 8 years for it. Thank you for having both of you on the show. It's great to have you. Thanks again.
Always a pleasure, Nisha.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Pleasure.
And
Thank you.
thanks for our viewers for watching Beyond Averages. We'll be back again next week with more news and analysis. Thank you for watching.